I had tried to trust Melissa for a long time. She was my daughter, and after my stroke she took over so many things. That morning she said, "We need to visit the bank together, Dad." Just routine paperwork. Her smile did not reach her eyes. I felt a small knot in my stomach the moment she said it. I wanted to believe her, but something in the way she held that thin folder made my teeth ache. We drove in quiet. She hummed off-key Christmas songs as the city passed by like a slow movie. When we parked, the air felt cold and thin. I leaned on my cane and walked with the steady, careful steps I had learned over many hard years. I had been a firefighter. I learned to watch tiny things that warned of danger, the smell of smoke, the way a beam might sag. That day I watched Melissa. She clutched the folder to her chest like it was precious. I pretended not to notice how tight her fingers were. Inside the bank, the room smelled of paper and new money. I saw Evelyn Hart at the counter, and relief warmed me. Evelyn was the woman who had been my bank manager for years, steady, fair, and plain-spoken. When she saw me she smiled, but her eyes were sharp. That felt right. I had made an appointment to see her before Melissa arrived. I had a plan. Melissa slid the folder across the counter with a quick smile. "Just updating accounts," she said. Evelyn opened the folder and her face tightened a little. She read, "Property deed transfer, annuity assignment, durable power of attorney." It was all there in black and white. A cold line of air ran down my back when I saw the words. I heard Melissa whisper once in the hallway the week before, "Once he signs, the house is ours." That little sentence had hollowed my chest. It felt like a betrayal I could taste. Before I go on, if you're watching this like a story, please subscribe and write in the comments what time it is where you are now. That small act was my last chance to stop them. Evelyn looked at me and asked the question we had agreed on earlier, our signal. The answer to that question would decide everything. The bank would not let a man sign away his life without checking he understood. The room felt small. I felt older and steadier than the trembling in my hands showed. The betrayal was sharp, but in that bright bank light something else clicked inside me. I would not be a man who folded. I would not let them steal my home without a fight. After my stroke, I had given Melissa more control than I once would have. At first it was good. She drove me to appointments, brought me food, and paid small bills. I told myself that was family. But over time small holes appeared in the trust. The mail got lost. Bills that I remembered paying still showed up late. When I asked, she said, "I handled that, Dad. Don't worry." I wanted to trust her voice, but I began to listen for the things she did not say. On the morning I noticed the missing deposits. I had walked to the table with a hot cup of coffee. I turned the statements over like a man turning stones in his hand. 2 pension deposits were missing. The amounts had been moved out quickly, to places I did not recognize. I felt a cold burn in my chest. I had worked and paid into that pension for decades. It kept my shelter and paid my bills. Those deposits were not accidents. Errors do not buy bright jewelry and flashy dinners. I listened from the hallway one day and I heard Melissa's voice low and urgent. "Once he signs, the house is ours," she told her husband. My world narrowed. I pressed my hand to my chest and could feel it beating too loud. I had helped raise her. I had given her everything I could, and suddenly I heard plans to take what I had left. I sat very still because rushing without a plan had never been my way. Running toward fire had taught me to assess carefully, and I needed that same steady head now. I called Evelyn Hart. "Can you meet me before she arrives?" I said into the phone, my voice steadier than I felt. She agreed with no fuss. "Bring the papers," she said. The calm in her voice was a small shield. I scanned every page Melissa had handed me weeks before. I printed a copy for myself and tucked it inside my coat like a secret. I made a plan to watch, to test, to set a trap if needed. It felt strange to be cautious about my own daughter, but the missing money and the whispered plan left me no choice. I would not sign away what I had built without the truth first standing in the light. I remember the morning I decided to copy every page. The house smelled faintly of lemon cleaner. I sat at the kitchen table with the folder Melissa had left and a small scanner I found in a drawer. My hands trembled at first, but I steadied them like I had when dragging someone out of a car after a crash. I scanned the small print and legal pages that looked like they were written to trap an old man. The words assignment and transfer jumped out like red embers. The fine print felt like a noose. I made a copy for myself and put it in a manila envelope labeled with my messy handwriting. Then I called Evelyn again and told her I would be early. I needed someone I trusted at the bank. She had worked with me for years and she knew my handwriting, my voice. I told myself that if the papers were fair, we would sign and move on. If they were not, we would have proof. That thought steadied me. At the bank, Evelyn watched the folder. She agreed to a small signal, a single question. If the papers were a full transfer, she would ask plainly, "Do you understand this is a full transfer of ownership?" If Melissa stammered or lied, Evelyn would know. More than that, Evelyn agreed to record the response. I felt a strange calm then. It was a plan built from small steady things, a friend, a question, copies on paper. When Melissa drove me, she hummed and tried to keep her voice bright. I kept my hands on the cane and my thoughts on the plan. At the bank the folders slid across the desk and Evelyn read aloud in a normal calm voice. Everything in me tightened when she found the deed transfer and the POA. My pulse raced but my voice did not shake when Evelyn looked at me and began the signal question. This was the moment all the careful work led to, the bank's soft light, the folder, the thin question that would either protect me or let the others take everything. When Evelyn said the words, the room seemed to lean in. She asked directly if I understood what the papers meant, if I was really giving everything away. The question sounded simple, but it carried the weight of months of worry. Melissa's practiced smile broke into a jagged thing. She reached for the papers like a bird flapping to escape a trap. For a second the whole place held its breath. Evelyn's hand closed over Melissa's and she said softly, "Bank property now, suspected fraud." It was calm but final. The other customers looked up. I heard whispers like wind in dry leaves. Melissa's face drained of color. She hissed at me across the counter, "You're humiliating me." The words were loud and sharp and I felt a hot pulse behind my eyes, but I answered steady, "You handled that part yourself." I found I did not tremble as much as I thought. Evelyn hit record on the desk phone and said, "Explain again why you needed these signatures, Ms. Carter." The way she asked landed like a net. Melissa stammered and tried to say I had asked for help. She lied and tried to wrap confusion around the truth. The bank manager's quiet voice kept the room cool and strict. Then she pressed a small button under the desk and a security guard materialized. The calm of the bank turned serious. Melissa tried to snatch the folder and dash away, but Evelyn's hand stayed like iron. I watched her panic turn to anger. That was the moment I felt strange relief. It was a relief that came from the hard work of watching and preparing. I thought of every small careful step I had taken, copying papers, talking to Evelyn, keeping a record. Those small things pushed against what she wanted to do. The bank was the right stage for the truth to come out. The guard led Melissa to a small office. Her voice came thin through the open door at first, full of sharp words and quick defenses. I sat at the counter and felt like a man watching an old wound scab over and finally start to heal. Evelyn handed me a small printed copy of the papers and told me gently what she had seen. The signatures looked wrong. Some lines were signed with the wrong flourishes. The handwriting on the forged lines did not match mine. The paper trail had been made to look real. It was careful, but not careful enough. Then Evelyn placed a small recorder in front of me and told me she had pressed record from the moment she suspected fraud. The sound of her voice asking the question and Melissa's shaky replies played in my head like a slow film. I heard the exact moment Melissa claimed I was confused and that she was only helping. I felt anger and sorrow, but most of all a hard, clear focus. I had not imagined the betrayal. I had not been wrong. When the uniformed officers arrived, I saw one of them nod at me with a quiet recognition. He had known me from my old days at the fire station. That small nod felt like a witness to my life. The officers reviewed the documents and listened to Evelyn's account. They asked calm, steady questions. Melissa's face had gone from red to white. She cried, "You're my father." The handcuffs glinted for a moment. The officer did his duty with a soft voice, and I watched the woman who once called me Dad walk out past the bank's front doors in handcuffs. The lobby filled with a hush. People pretended not to look, but I saw eyes on us all the same. For the first time in months, something shifted inside me. I had felt weak and tricked and alone for so long that this small victory seemed almost unreal. The officers told me what would happen next. They would take a statement. They would examine all evidence. I nodded and felt strangely light. I had planned carefully, and the careful plan had worked. The hard work of noticing, documenting, and asking for help had saved not just my house but my dignity. At the station, I gave my statement. The officer's name was Ramos. He listened carefully, taking notes with slow strokes of his pen. He asked when I had first suspected Melissa, what I had heard, and how I had arranged the meeting. I told him everything, the whispers in the hallway, the missing deposits, the plan with Evelyn. When I finished, he leaned back and said, "You caught her clean, Mr. Carter. We'll charge forgery and attempted financial exploitation." The words sounded heavy but final, like a door closing. Ramos said they would keep me updated. I signed my name at the bottom of the report, my hand steady now. Then I stepped outside. The winter air hit my face like a clean slap. For the first time in months, I breathed freely. The drive home was quiet. The passenger seat beside me sat empty where Melissa had been only hours earlier. The sunlight fell in strips through the windshield. I rolled down the window just enough for the cold to brush my face. It smelled of dust and pine. I realized I didn't feel broken, I felt awake. That night, I sat at my table with a warm cup of tea. The house was silent except for the small hum of the refrigerator. I looked at the chair where she used to sit and talk. I thought about all the ways I'd ignored signs, how her voice sharpened when I asked questions, how she avoided letting me open my own mail. I wondered where I had lost her. Maybe in the moment I let her take control of my bills. Maybe earlier. Before going to bed, I called Evelyn. "I wanted to say thank you," I said, "for helping me see what was right in front of me." She said quietly, "You did that yourself, Mr. Carter. I only opened the door." Her voice was calm and steady, the way people sound when they've seen a lot but still believe in decency. I hung up feeling lighter than I had in months. The next day would bring trouble, maybe headlines, but for that night, I slept soundly, an old man who had finally stood up for himself. The news broke faster than I expected. The local paper ran the headline, "Bank Manager Thwarts Family Fraud Attempt." There was a photo of Evelyn shaking hands with a police officer. My own picture was small at the bottom corner, my quiet smile caught by someone's camera. The article told the story simply. It said a retired firefighter had been targeted by a family member attempting to transfer his assets. It said a quick-thinking bank manager noticed irregular paperwork and called the police. It didn't name Melissa, but everyone in our neighborhood could guess. The next morning, I found 2 pies on my porch. One had a note taped to it, for standing up when most would fold. The handwriting was from Mrs. Green across the street. She'd known me for 30 years. Another neighbor, Tom, waved from his driveway, awkward but kind. "Heard what happened," he said. "You did good, Jack." His words surprised me with how much they meant. Still, behind all the support, I felt a dull ache. I missed my daughter. Even with what she'd done, I couldn't switch off the years of love. She was the little girl who once drew me firefighter trucks in red crayon. Now she was a woman in trouble, and I couldn't save her this time. Days turned to weeks. Ramos called to tell me the charges were official: forgery, attempted financial exploitation of an elder, and falsifying legal documents. He said the case would go to court in 2 months. I thanked him, hung up, and stared at the phone. My reflection in the dark window looked tired but peaceful. That night, I found the envelope of copied papers Evelyn had kept safe for me. I opened it slowly. The lines and signatures were clear. I realized then how close I'd come to losing everything: my home, my savings, my independence. It felt strange to be grateful for paper and ink, for a small question asked at the right time. Before sleeping, I whispered something I hadn't said in months. "Thank you." I wasn't sure if I was talking to Evelyn, or to my wife who'd been gone 10 years. Maybe both. The court summons came in mid-January. The envelope was thick and official. My name printed in bold letters made my stomach twist. It wasn't fear this time, just the heavy knowledge of what came next. I called Evelyn. She had already heard. "They'll want you to testify," she said. "Don't worry. We'll both be there." Her calm voice steadied me again. She told me not to talk to reporters, to rest, and to remember the truth. "You didn't trap anyone, Jack," she said. "You only showed the light." The trial was set for early February. The days before it crawled. I kept busy, reading the paper, polishing the old fire metals in my study, walking the block in the mornings. The neighbors waved now, not with pity but respect. I felt stronger each day. When the court day came, I wore my best gray suit. Evelyn met me outside the courthouse steps. "Ready?" she asked. I nodded. Inside, the air smelled of paper and polish. The judge was stern but fair. Melissa sat across the room, her shoulders small under a gray sweater. She didn't look at me. When they called me to the stand, I took the oath, my hand steady. I told the truth. I told them how I had trusted her, how the missing checks led me to listen at doors, how I'd worked with Evelyn to confirm what was real. The prosecutor played the recording. Melissa's voice filled the courtroom. "He's confused. He asked me to help." Hearing it again still hurt, but this time I didn't flinch. When it was over, the prosecutor rested the case. Melissa's lawyer asked a few questions, but the evidence was heavy. The judge said she would deliver the verdict in a week. I left the courthouse tired but lighter. Outside, reporters waited, but Evelyn put a hand on my arm. "Let's get coffee instead," she said. And we did, hot, simple, and quiet. A week later, the verdict came. Guilty on all counts. The words hit me not like a blow, but like a sigh leaving the chest after holding it too long. I watched from the bench as Melissa's knees buckled. A guard caught her arm before she could fall. The judge's voice was clear and calm. Sentenced to 6 months in county jail, restitution to be paid in full, and completion of financial ethics counseling. Melissa nodded through tears. I didn't cheer. I didn't feel triumph. I felt release. After court, Evelyn and I walked out into the bright winter light. She looked at me quietly for a moment, then said, "You saved yourself, Jack, and probably others too." I didn't answer right away. The air smelled of rain coming. I said finally, "I just wanted to keep my life mine." She smiled. "You did." That night I sat by the window and watched headlights move across the street. The silence of the house no longer felt heavy. It felt earned. I thought about forgiveness. It wasn't ready to arrive yet, but I could see it somewhere in the distance. The next morning, Ramos called again. "Funds are being restored," he said. Restitution order went through. His tone was lighter than before. "You'll get every cent back." I thanked him. It wasn't about the money, not anymore, but it mattered that justice had hands. In the afternoon, I went for a walk. The wind was cold, but the sun cut through it. A young man at the corner store recognized me from the paper. "You're that guy, right? The one from the bank?" I nodded. He grinned. "Good for you, sir." For the first time in a long while, I smiled easily. Months passed. Life began to settle into a new rhythm. I made breakfast on my own again, kept my bills neatly stacked in a folder, and checked each account myself. I even taught myself online banking, the right way. Evelyn helped me set up alerts so no one could move a cent without me knowing. Spring came slow, and the light through my window felt warm. One morning, I received an invitation from the state attorney's office. They wanted me to speak at a small conference on elder protection awareness. Evelyn had suggested my case be used as an example. I wasn't sure at first, but she said, "Your story can help others, Jack. Let them hear it." So I went. I stood behind a wooden podium in a modest room filled with bankers, social workers, and seniors. My hands shook slightly at first, but once I started speaking, the words came easier than I expected. I told them about the missing checks, the folder, and the question that saved me. I told them about Evelyn's courage. When I finished, people clapped, not loud, but real. Afterward, a man in a navy suit shook my hand. "We're naming our new fraud prevention guideline after your case," he said. "We're calling it Project Carter." I laughed softly. That's a lot for an old man who just didn't want to sign the wrong line. When I got home, the sunlight hit the framed photo of my wife on the mantel. I sat beside it for a while, quiet. "We did okay," I told her photo. Maybe justice wasn't a loud thing after all. Maybe it was a steady, quiet heartbeat returning to normal after a long time of fear. It was early summer when I got the first letter from Melissa. The envelope came from the county jail, pale blue and trembling at the edges as if even the paper was ashamed. I stared at it for hours before opening it. Inside, her handwriting looked smaller than I remembered, hesitant, uneven. "Dad," it began, "I don't know what to say except I'm sorry. I thought control meant love. I thought if I could keep everything under my name, I'd be safe. I was wrong." I read it twice. There was no excuse in her words, no denial either. Just a sort of broken honesty that hurt more than her lies ever had. She ended it with, "I understand if you never want to see me again, but I'll write if you'll let me." I folded the letter carefully and placed it inside my will folder, not as proof, but as a reminder that even betrayal could bend toward truth if given enough time. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with my tea and stared out the window. The cicadas were singing, the same sound that filled summers when Melissa was little. Back then, she'd sit on the porch steps beside me, swinging her legs and asking what each star was called. I didn't reply right away. I didn't know what to say. Forgiveness wasn't simple, and I didn't know it on command. But I also didn't feel the sharp anger anymore. Just a tired kind of sadness, the kind that made you breathe slower but deeper. When I called Evelyn later that week, she said softly, "You'll know when you're ready to answer her." I believed her. Evelyn had a way of knowing when silence was the right reply. For now, I kept busy. I tended the garden, fixed a broken latch on the gate, and mailed a donation to the local seniors' legal aid office. I didn't sign my name big. Just small letters, J. Carter. I wanted to help others who didn't have an Evelyn watching over them. One quiet morning in July, I walked into the bank with a small bouquet of yellow roses. Evelyn looked up from her desk, surprised. "No appointments today," she said with a smile. I shook my head. "Just gratitude," I replied. We sat for a while, sharing coffee in the break room. It wasn't about business anymore. We talked about small things, the weather, her garden, the new teller who still mixed up deposit slips. She told me she was helping set up a new fraud awareness program for bank staff across the state. "Your story helped get it approved," she said. "You'd be surprised how many seniors get tricked by family." That word family hung in the air. I nodded. "It's easier to see danger when it's outside the house," I said. She looked at me with the kind of understanding that doesn't need words. Before I left, she handed me a business card with a new title under her name, Regional Compliance Officer. I laughed softly. "Promotion?" She smiled. "Thanks to you, partly." Outside, the day was warm, the kind of summer light that makes the pavement shimmer. I sat in my car for a minute, holding the roses leftover scent on my fingers. I thought about how close I'd come to losing everything and how, somehow, that same loss had brought new people into my life, people like Evelyn, who showed courage when I was too scared to admit I needed it. When I got home, I placed one of the roses beside my wife's picture on the mantel. "You'd like her," I told the photo. And I meant it. Evelyn had the same calm strength my wife used to have, the same way of making hard things seem like steps you could still take. That night, I wrote Melissa back. Just one line: "I got your letter. I hear you." I didn't forgive her yet. But I didn't shut the door either. Sometimes the first step isn't forgiveness. It's just not locking the gate. August brought storms. Real ones, summer monsoons that turned the Arizona sky black in minutes. I sat by the window as rain hit the glass, lightning cutting through the horizon. It reminded me of firefighting days, the way you could smell danger before you saw it. But this time the thunder didn't scare me. It sounded like cleansing. I received another letter from Melissa. This one longer, steadier. She said she was attending counseling in jail. She wrote about the moment at the bank when Evelyn asked the question and how it felt like her mask had cracked. She said, "I saw myself through your eyes, and I didn't like who I'd become." I didn't cry, but something inside softened. I folded the letter and added it to the first one. Maybe someday I'd read them again without feeling that old ache. Evelyn called that week. "We're hosting a fundraiser for senior legal aid," she said. "We'd love you to speak again." I hesitated, but she added, "It's not about the past, Jack. It's about what came after." So I went. The room was filled with quiet faces, some wrinkled with years, some sharp with focus. I told them about the fear of realizing your own child might see you as an opportunity, not as a parent. I told them about the power of asking for help before it's too late. I ended with the line I'd been repeating in my head for months: "Trust is a gift, but keep the receipt." When I stepped down, Evelyn handed me a small plaque, "Hart and Carter Fund, helping seniors protect what's theirs." I didn't have words. I only nodded. Driving home, I passed the old park where Melissa used to play. The swings moved slightly in the wind, empty but still swaying. I thought, maybe forgiveness isn't about forgetting. Maybe it's about keeping the swing moving, even when no one's on it. By late September, Melissa was due for release. I told myself I wouldn't go. I told Evelyn the same thing. "You don't owe her that," she said gently. But the morning of her release, I found myself driving toward the county facility anyway. When she walked out, her eyes found mine immediately. She looked smaller, thinner, like she had been washed of all the noise that used to surround her. For a long minute, we just stared. Then she said quietly, "You came." "I did," I answered. "Because you're still my daughter." We didn't hug. We didn't talk about the trial or the money or the house. We just stood there while the world moved around us, cars honking, birds calling, a bus pulling out of the station. "I'm going to stay with a friend," she said. "Try to start over." "That's good. I don't expect you to trust me." "I know," I said. "But maybe someday." She nodded. Then she walked toward the bus stop. I watched her go, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I had to chase or rescue her. I had already done my part. The rest was hers to carry. That night, Evelyn came by with takeout, Chinese food and a bottle of ginger ale. We ate quietly in the kitchen. "You did the hard thing," she said. "You showed up without giving in." After dinner, I walked her to the door. "You've done a lot for me, Evelyn," I said. She smiled, her eyes warm. "You've done more for yourself, Jack. That's the part you still don't see." When she left, the night air was cool. I stood on the porch listening to the crickets. Somewhere down the street, laughter floated from a neighbor's yard. Life was moving again. I finally felt ready to move with it. October came quietly, with cooler mornings and softer light. One afternoon, I received an envelope from the state attorney's office. Inside was a check, restitution from the case, the money Melissa had been ordered to return. I held it in my hand for a long time, unsure whether to cash it. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like a wound closing. That same week, Evelyn invited me to a small gathering at the bank, a celebration for employees who had completed the new fraud prevention training. She wanted me to say a few words. I almost refused, but she smiled and said, "Just tell them what you learned." So I stood again before a group of tellers and managers. "I learned," I said, "that trust is like fire. It keeps you warm when handled right, but it burns everything when it's misused. Keep your eyes open. Protect people who forget to protect themselves." Afterward, Evelyn handed me an envelope. Inside was a simple certificate, "In recognition of courage and awareness, Jack Carter." I didn't know what to say, so I just shook her hand. On the drive home, I thought about Melissa, about all the steps that had led to this peace. It wasn't the kind of peace you get from winning. It was quieter, earned. When I reached my house, I sat on the porch as the sun went down. I could hear kids playing down the street, their laughter echoing off the pavement. I thought of Melissa's kids, my grandchildren, and wondered if they still remembered me. I hoped so. That night, I decided what to do with the restitution check. I would donate most of it to the Hart and Carter Fund. Maybe the rest could go towards something simple, a new coat, a better coffee pot, a small comfort. I didn't need much anymore, just the calm of knowing I had my life back, one quiet day at a time. Winter crept in again. The mornings were crisp enough to see my breath when I opened the door for the paper. Life had settled into something steady. I'd make coffee, check my bills, and sit by the window reading the headlines. Most days were quiet, peaceful quiet, not lonely quiet. One morning, as I was reading, I saw another article about elder fraud prevention. It mentioned the Hart and Carter Fund by name. My chest warmed a little. The photo showed Evelyn standing beside a group of new bank trainees. I smiled and thought, she's still fighting the good fight. Later that week, she called. "We're doing a workshop downtown," she said. "You should come, Jack. People trust a survivor more than they trust a pamphlet." I laughed softly. "You just want me to tell my story again." She chuckled. "Exactly." So I went. The room smelled of coffee and fresh paper. There were maybe 50 people, most gray-haired, some young volunteers taking notes. I told them about the bank, about Evelyn's question, about the feeling when someone you love stops being safe. When I finished, people lined up to thank me. One woman held my hand and said, "You gave me courage to look at my son's accounts." Driving home afterward, I realized something important. My pain had turned into something useful. I couldn't change what Melissa had done, but I could make sure someone else didn't fall into the same trap. That night, I sat at my kitchen table and wrote a short note to Evelyn, "Thank you for giving me back my purpose." I tucked it into an envelope and left it on her desk the next day when she wasn't looking. Back home, I turned off the lights and stared out at the stars. I used to think life ended when trust broke. But maybe it just bends, reshapes, and finds new places to rest. That thought carried me easily into sleep. December arrived again, the anniversary month of everything that had happened. I couldn't help but remember that first bank meeting, the shaking hands, the folder that nearly cost me my home. A year ago, I'd felt small and scared. Now, the house felt like mine again. Every creak and corner belonged to me. Evelyn invited me to the bank's holiday luncheon. The room was decorated with red ribbons and silver lights. "We made it through another year," she said, raising her glass. I clinked mine against hers and said, "A better one than last." As the lunch ended, she pulled me aside. "You should meet someone," she said. A man in a gray suit approached, middle-aged with calm eyes. "This is David Barnes from the State Financial Bureau," she said. "He helped write new elder protection laws after your case." Barnes shook my hand. "Mr. Carter, your story helped us change policy. Bank staff can now pause suspicious transactions involving seniors. We call it the Carter Clause." I blinked, surprised. "You named a law after me?" He grinned. "After your courage." Driving home, I couldn't stop smiling. It wasn't pride, it was relief. My mistake, my hurt, had turned into something that would protect others long after I was gone. That evening, I lit a candle beside my wife's photo. "You'd laugh at this," I said softly. "They made a law out of me." The candlelight flickered against her smiling face. For the first time, it didn't feel like talking to a picture. It felt like being heard. Before going to bed, I wrote in my notebook, 1 year since the question that saved me. Lesson learned: don't stop believing you matter, even when someone you love tries to make you small. I closed the notebook with a steady hand. A few days before Christmas, I received a surprise visitor. When I opened the door, 2 small faces peeked up at me, my grandchildren. Behind them stood a woman I hadn't seen in a long time. Melissa. She looked nervous but calmer than before. "They wanted to see their grandpa," she said quietly. The children held out a plate covered with plastic wrap. "We made cookies," the younger one said shyly. I stepped aside. "Come in." The kids ran to the living room, their laughter filling the space that had felt too quiet for too long. Melissa stood by the doorway, hands twisting together. "I wasn't sure if you'd open the door," she said. "I wasn't sure either," I admitted. We sat at the table while the kids played. She told me she'd gotten a steady job at a small bakery. "It's honest work," she said, looking down. "I've been trying to rebuild." I nodded. "That's good, Melissa." "I'm not asking for money, Dad," she said quickly. "I just wanted them to know you're not the monster their father said you were." The words hit hard. I didn't know what to say. So I said what was true. "You hurt me deeply. But I'm glad you came." We ate one of the cookies together. It was too sweet, but I didn't care. The kids showed me drawings of Christmas trees, and for a moment, I saw my little girl again in their faces. When they left, Melissa turned at the door. "Merry Christmas, Dad." "Merry Christmas," I replied. After they were gone, I stood in the silence, tears slipping down without warning. It wasn't sadness, it was something softer. Maybe the first hint of forgiveness. January brought a new start. Evelyn retired that month. She called to tell me before the announcement went public. "Time to let the younger ones take over," she said with a laugh. "I've trained them well." "You've earned the rest," I told her. "But the bank won't be the same." She invited me to her small retirement gathering. When I arrived, the conference room was filled with flowers, laughter, and a few teary eyes. Evelyn hugged me tightly. "You've become part of the story here," she said. "Don't forget that." During her speech, she mentioned me by name. "This man reminded us what integrity looks like," she said, pointing in my direction. People clapped, and I felt my face heat up. I wasn't used to that kind of attention, but I didn't shrink from it either. After the party, we sat together on a bench outside the building. The sun was warm despite the chill air. "What will you do now?" I asked. "Travel," she said. "Maybe write a book about real stories, people like you who refuse to be victims." "Then I'll buy the first copy," I said with a smile. Before leaving, she pressed something into my hand, a small silver pen. "The one you used to sign your life back," she said softly. "Keep it." A reminder. When I got home, I placed the pen beside my wife's photo. It gleamed softly in the afternoon light. I thought of all the signatures that almost ruined me, and the one that had saved me. That night, I slept easily. Not because everything was perfect, but because everything was finally honest. Spring came early that year. The desert bloomed with pale yellow flowers, and my garden grew wild with color. I spent mornings trimming bushes and talking to neighbors who now stopped to chat longer than before. Life had gone from storm to calm, from betrayal to balance. One afternoon, I got a letter from the state office inviting me to attend an awards dinner. Citizen Courage Award, it read. I laughed out loud. Me? Courage? I almost didn't go, but Evelyn, now living near Flagstaff, called when she heard. "You'd better show up, Jack. Don't make me drive down there to drag you." So I went. The hall was filled with people in suits, cameras flashing, voices echoing. When my name was called, I walked to the stage slowly but steady. The applause was warm. The presenter said, "Mr. Carter stood up when silence would have been easier. Because of him, hundreds of seniors are safer today." I accepted the plaque and said simply, "All I did was ask for help and hold on to the truth. That's all any of us can do." The audience stood and clapped again. After the ceremony, a young reporter asked, "What message would you give others?" I thought for a second and said, "If someone asks you to sign something, read it twice, and if it doesn't feel right, say no once." Driving home, I placed the award on the passenger seat. It wasn't shiny justice I cared about, it was peace. Real peace. I rolled down the window. The night air smelled like rain again, the same scent from that first day in the bank when everything changed. I smiled and whispered to the empty car, "You tried to make me sign everything away." Instead, I signed my life back to myself. The days after the award ceremony felt calm. I placed the plaque on the mantel beside my wife's picture and the silver pen Evelyn had given me. Sometimes, in the morning light, all three objects glowed faintly, the pen, the plaque, and her photograph. Together, they told a story I never expected to live through. I kept busy. I taught a few neighbors how to check their online banking safely. Some afternoons, people would stop by just to talk. It seemed everyone had a story, a nephew who borrowed too much, a cousin with sudden interest in a will, a friend who didn't want to offend family by saying no. I listened. I told them what Evelyn told me, you can love your family and still protect yourself. Then one afternoon, I got another letter. Melissa again. This one came from a halfway house, not jail. She wrote about her counseling program, how she'd been asked to share her story with other women who'd made mistakes. They call it redemption sessions, she wrote. I tell them how greed feels like control until it burns everything around you. At the end of the letter she said, "Dad, I know you may never forgive me, but I'm trying to forgive myself. Maybe that's the first step." I folded the letter and sat for a while in silence. Then I took out a clean sheet of paper and wrote back, "Keep trying. That's all any of us can do." No long words, no promises. Just truth. When I mailed it the next morning, I didn't feel uncertain. For the first time since everything began, I wasn't angry, and I wasn't afraid. I was just living again. The past was a scar, but scars are proof of healing. By April, the desert wind turned warm. I started volunteering twice a week at the local community center. They ran free financial safety classes for seniors, funded by the Hart and Carter Fund. Evelyn's idea, my story, and a growing team of volunteers. My first day teaching, I stood in front of 15 people sitting in folding chairs. Most looked like me, gray hair, cautious eyes. I told them about trust and about the question that had saved me. I showed them how to read account alerts, how to spot scams, and how to set up a second verification call for any large transaction. After the session, a man came up and said, "I never thought it could happen to me. But I've been ignoring some strange withdrawals." I looked him in the eye and said, "Don't wait. Call your bank now." That night, as I locked up the center, I realized something. The pain that once silenced me was now helping others speak up. The story that nearly broke me was saving strangers. When I got home, the phone rang. It was Melissa again. She said softly, "Dad, I got your letter. Thank you for writing back." Her voice trembled, but it wasn't the same nervous tone I'd heard in court. It was humble, human. "I'm proud of you for trying," I said. "I still have a long way to go." "So do I admitted. We didn't talk long. But when we hung up, I felt a peace I hadn't felt in years. Maybe forgiveness wasn't a single moment. Maybe it was built, one small phone call at a time. May came with early heat. I spent more time in the garden, trimming roses, watering the dry soil, feeling the sun on my arms. I found comfort in simple work. The flowers grew brighter that year, almost as if the ground itself had let go of the shadows. One afternoon, the mailman handed me a thicker envelope with an official seal. It was from the state. Inside was a small grant check addressed to the Hart and Carter Fund, with a note saying my volunteer work had helped secure new state funding for elder protection programs. I called Evelyn right away. She answered from her new home in Flagstaff, laughter in her voice. "See? You're still making news," she said. "You were meant to do this, Jack." I didn't know about meant, but I knew it felt right. I'd spent my life saving people from fire. Maybe this was just another kind of rescue, helping people protect their homes, their peace, their dignity. That night, I opened my old photo album. There was one picture of Melissa at 10 years old, grinning with missing teeth, holding a tiny medal from a school spelling bee. I smiled back at the frozen moment. I didn't hate her anymore. The anger had burned itself out, leaving only ash, and even ash can feed new soil. Before bed, I wrote one last note in my journal: the fire is out. But I am still warm. Summer rolled in. The local paper ran a follow-up article: fraud case spurs statewide elder reform. They mentioned me again, called me the quiet firefighter who refused to sign away his life. I laughed when I read it. Quiet maybe, but not weak. Evelyn visited that month. We met for lunch at Morning Brew, the small cafe where I'd first taken her flowers years ago. Time had softened both of us, her hair more silver, my walk slower, but our laughter came easy. "You ever think," she asked between sips of coffee, "that maybe your story was never about revenge, but about awakening?" I thought about it. "Maybe both," I said. "Sometimes you have to lose everything to learn how to guard what matters." We spent the afternoon visiting the firehouse where I used to work. The younger firefighters treated me like a hero, though I just smiled and told them I'd been lucky. As I stood by the red engine, I realized that courage comes in many uniforms. Sometimes it's a helmet, sometimes it's a question at a bank counter. When we parted, Evelyn hugged me and whispered, "I'm proud of you, Jack." I watched her drive away, the sun gleaming on her car roof like a closing chapter. That night, the house felt peaceful. I brewed tea, looked at my award plaque, and smiled. Justice hadn't just been done, it had grown roots. By September, my life was simple and full again. I still volunteered at the center, still met with neighbors for coffee, and still kept Melissa's letters neatly in a drawer. She wrote every few weeks now, no begging, no guilt. Just updates about her job, her kids, and her progress. Then one day, she asked if she could visit again. "Just me this time," she wrote. "I need to tell you something face to face." When she arrived, she looked stronger, steady eyes, neat clothes, a calmness that hadn't been there before. We sat on the porch, the same place where she used to play as a little girl. "I've been accepted to speak at a program for women leaving prison," she said. "They want me to tell my story, what greed cost me, and what your question saved me from." I nodded, my throat tight. "That's good work, Melissa." She looked at me, her eyes shining. "I learned from you, Dad. You didn't just protect yourself, you showed me how to take responsibility." We sat in silence for a while. The late sun painted everything gold. She reached over and took my hand gently. "I'm sorry," she said again. This time, I squeezed her hand back. "I know," I whispered. When she left that evening, I watched her walk down the driveway, the same way I had watched her leave the jail a year before. But this time, the air didn't feel heavy. It felt clean. The past was still there, but it no longer ruled the present. October came with a quiet kind of beauty. The desert light softened, and the mornings grew cool enough to need a jacket again. I started walking every day, just down the block and back, but it cleared my mind. On those walks, I often saw the same neighbors who'd once whispered about the bank story. Now, they waved and called out, "Morning, Mr. Carter." It still surprised me how quickly shame could turn into respect once the truth was known. One morning, the mail brought a thick packet from the State Elder Protection Office. Inside were copies of new training materials for banks statewide. On the first page, in bold letters, it read, Project Carter, Early Detection and Intervention Protocols. My name printed there felt strange. I wasn't used to being part of something official. But I smiled. If my mistake had built a wall of safety for others, then it was worth every bruise. That evening, Melissa called again. Her voice sounded lighter. "Dad, guess what? The program I spoke at wants me to stay on as a mentor." "That's wonderful," I said. "I told them how you faced everything without yelling, without revenge, just truth. I'm trying to do the same." For the first time in years, I could picture her proud of something real. Not money, not power, growth. After we hung up, I sat on the porch watching the sky turn deep orange. A breeze rustled the mesquite trees, and I felt a calm so deep it almost scared me. For months I'd lived waiting for storms. Now the quiet itself was the gift. When I went inside, I looked at the framed deed on my wall, my wife's signature beside mine. The house was still ours, and in a way, still hers too. I whispered, "We made it, didn't we?" And the creak of the floorboard felt like her answer. November rolled around again, another Thanksgiving. A full year since the day Melissa tried to make me sign everything away. That day had started with fear and ended with freedom. Now, I was planning a different kind of dinner. I set the table for 3, myself, Melissa, and Evelyn. I wanted the 2 women who had shaped this new chapter of my life to finally meet. Melissa arrived first. She brought a pumpkin pie she'd baked herself. "From scratch," she said proudly. She looked around the house like she was seeing it for the first time. "You've kept it beautiful." "I had help," I said, smiling as Evelyn's car pulled up. When Evelyn walked in, Melissa froze, realizing who she was. "You're the bank manager," she whispered. Evelyn nodded gently. "And you're the daughter who taught us why honesty matters." For a moment, silence filled the room. Then Evelyn added softly, "You gave us a reason to make change. Don't waste it." Dinner went better than I could have hoped. We talked, we laughed, and for the first time since everything began, there was no anger between us. When dessert came, Melissa looked at me and said, "Dad, I'm not asking for forgiveness tonight. I just wanted to say thank you for not giving up on me." I looked at both of them, 2 women who had faced me at my worst and best. "You both gave me back my life," I said quietly. When the night ended, Evelyn hugged us both. Melissa left with tears in her eyes, but they were good tears, the kind that wash away the past. A week later, the local paper called again. "Mr. Carter, would you allow us to do a follow-up? Not about the crime, but about the recovery?" At first, I said no. I didn't want more attention. But then I thought about all the people who'd told me my story helped them protect themselves. So I agreed. They sent a young reporter, maybe 25, with wide eyes and nervous hands. He sat at my kitchen table with a small recorder. "What do you think justice means now, Mr. Carter?" he asked. I thought for a long time before answering. Justice isn't payback. It's peace. It's waking up and knowing you're safe in your own house. He smiled and nodded, scribbling in his notebook. "And forgiveness? That's not a law," I said. "That's a choice you make every morning." The article came out a week later. From victim to voice, one man's story sparks change. My photo showed me standing in front of the same bank where everything had started. The caption read, "He didn't lose his home, he rebuilt it from truth." Neighbors came by to congratulate me. Some left pies again, like the year before. But this time, I didn't feel like a hero. I just felt human. That night, I clipped the article and placed it beside the others in a small folder. Not for pride, for memory. Because forgetting the fire doesn't keep you safe. Remembering it does. December came quietly. Melissa and I spoke regularly now, short calls, honest ones. She was working full-time at the bakery, renting a small apartment. She even told me she was thinking of going back to school. "Business classes," she said. "Real ones this time." I laughed. "Just promise you'll read the fine print." We were rebuilding, slow but steady. No pretending the past hadn't happened, just learning how to live with it. One cold morning, a letter arrived addressed to the Carter family. Inside was an invitation from the governor's office. They were hosting a ceremony honoring community heroes who'd inspired new legislation. My name was on the list. When I called Evelyn, she laughed. "You're going to have to wear a tie again." At the ceremony, I stood beside police officers, teachers, and volunteers. When my turn came, the governor handed me a certificate and said, "For bravery not in battle, but in integrity." Afterward, Melissa hugged me tight. "You earned this," she said. "So did you," I replied. That night, I looked at the certificate and thought about everything that had changed in 1 year. My daughter wasn't my enemy anymore. Evelyn was more than a friend, she was part of my family now. And I, once broken and humiliated, had become someone others looked to for strength. The following spring, I woke early one morning to golden light spilling through the curtains. I brewed coffee, sat at the table, and opened my old journal. The last line I'd written months ago still rang true: "The fire is out, but I am still warm." I picked up the silver pen Evelyn had given me and wrote the final entry. She tried to make me sign over everything. Instead, I signed my life back to myself. Then I closed the journal and smiled. Outside, the neighborhood was waking up. Kids rode bikes down the street, a dog barked somewhere, and the air smelled faintly of desert rain. I stood, stretched, and looked around my quiet, safe house. Evelyn was coming over later. We were planning to plant a few new rose bushes out front. Maybe Melissa would visit next week with the kids. Life wasn't perfect, but it was whole again. As I poured another cup of coffee, I realized something I hadn't before: revenge never gave me peace. Truth did. Courage did. When I stepped outside, the morning sun hit my face, warm and bright. I breathed deeply, feeling light for the first time in years. Sometimes, the biggest victory isn't punishing those who hurt you, it's proving they never broke you. Fade out on the sound of a pen clicking shut. The following week, Evelyn and I planted the rose bushes together. She wore her gardening gloves, the same kind my wife used to wear, bright green, with small dirt stains that showed she wasn't afraid to work. We dug side by side, quiet except for the sound of shovels in the soil. At one point she looked up and said, "Funny, isn't it? How something can bloom again after being cut back so hard." I nodded. Roses, people, same lesson, I think. After we finished, we sat on the porch sipping lemonade. She told me she'd been asked to join a state advisory board for financial ethics. "They want me to help design new safety systems," she said. "Would you consider joining too?" "Me?" I laughed. "I'm just an old man with a story." She smiled. "Exactly. They need stories. Data doesn't move hearts, people do." I promised to think about it. Later that night, as I looked out at the small row of fresh roses, I realized something. Every chapter of pain had turned into something useful. The story wasn't just mine anymore, it was helping shape laws, programs, and awareness across the state. I sat down at my desk, pulled out a fresh page, and wrote, "Purpose doesn't retire when we do." The next morning, I called Evelyn. "Tell them I'm in," I said. She laughed softly. "I already did." We talked about our first meeting, how we'd share ideas and make sure other seniors learned to trust, but carefully this time. Before hanging up, she said, "You've come a long way, Jack." I looked at the sunlight spilling over the new rose bushes and replied, "Not done yet." By summer, the advisory board had become part of my weekly routine. We met every Thursday at the downtown Civic Center, a mix of bankers, lawyers, and community advocates. I sat near the back most days, listening more than I spoke. But when I did, the room always went quiet. One afternoon, the chairman asked, "Mr. Carter, what would you say to someone afraid to report family fraud?" I didn't hesitate. Fear is natural. But silence costs more than confrontation ever will. The group nodded, some taking notes. It felt strange, Me, once the confused father at the bank counter, now giving advice that would shape state policy. But maybe that was the point. Healing doesn't erase scars, it gives them purpose. After the meeting, a young woman from the committee stopped me in the hall. My grandmother went through something similar, she said softly. Your story gave me courage to help her. I thanked her and walked outside, feeling the weight of the day lift a little. That evening, Evelyn came by with a folder full of new documents to review. We worked at my kitchen table, our laughter breaking the stillness between pages. You ever think, I asked, that all this came from one question you asked me that day? She smiled. Maybe. But you answered it the right way. That's what saved you. When she left, I stood by the door for a long time, thinking about that. Maybe salvation isn't a single moment, it's the courage to choose truth over fear, again and again. One day in late July, I received a call from the local community college. A professor wanted me to speak to his ethics class. We're studying real-world consequences of financial trust, he said. Your story fits perfectly. So, I agreed. A week later, I stood in front of 20 students, their notebooks open, their faces curious. I told them everything, the stroke, the dependence, the betrayal, the question at the bank, the moment my daughter's mask fell apart. They listened in silence. When I finished, one student asked, "Did it make you stop trusting people?" I thought for a moment. "No," I said. "It just made me trust smarter." There's a difference. After class, the professor handed me a small card signed by all the students. "Thank you for teaching us what real courage looks like." I carried that card in my wallet for weeks after. That night, Melissa called again. "Dad, guess what?" she said, excitement in her voice. "I've been accepted to take online courses. I'm studying accounting." "Accounting?" I laughed. "That's a bold choice." I figured it's time to understand the thing I misused. We talked for an hour about her classes, her kids, and her small apartment full of second-hand furniture and hope. When we hung up, I sat for a long while, realizing I didn't dread her voice anymore. It sounded like healing. Sometimes the best revenge isn't punishment, it's watching the person who hurt you choose to grow instead. Autumn came early that year. The nights cooled down, and the roses outside the window began to fade into deeper red. I'd been asked to give a small speech at the annual Hart and Carter Fund banquet. The thought made me nervous. Evelyn, of course, found it amusing. "You've told this story 100 times, she teased. "You could do it in your sleep." The night of the banquet, I wore my best suit and that same silver pen clipped inside my jacket pocket. When my name was called, I walked to the podium. The lights were bright, the crowd silent. I began simply. A few years ago, I thought my life was ending. I thought trust had burned me for good. But what I've learned is that trust doesn't die, it just changes shape. I looked around the room, faces of families, survivors, lawyers, and seniors who'd fought their own battles. "Trust is earned twice," I said slowly, "once when you give it, and again when you defend it." When I finished, the room stood in applause. Evelyn's eyes glistened in the front row. Afterward, she handed me a framed photo of the original bank where we'd met. Beneath it was a small plaque that read, "Do you understand what this means?" The question that started a movement. I hung it in my living room that night, right above my wife's photo. December rolled in again, another year gone. I woke up early on Christmas morning to find a small package on my porch. No name on it, just a tag that read, "For Dad." Inside was a handmade ornament, glass-shaped like a rose, with tiny etched words, "One question saved us both. Melissa." I hung it on the small tree by the window, the light catching it just right. Later that day, she and the kids stopped by for dinner. The laughter around the table was easy, natural, as if we'd never been broken. After they left, I sat in the quiet living room, the ornament glinting softly on the branch. Evelyn called to wish me Merry Christmas. We talked about plans for the new year, more workshops, more awareness, maybe even a book together. Before hanging up, she said, "Jack, you've turned pain into something beautiful." I smiled. Guess that makes me a craftsman, not a victim. When I turned off the lights, the rose ornament still shimmered faintly in the dark, glowing like a promise that the worst was behind us. The world outside was silent, but inside me there was only peace, the kind that comes not from revenge, but from rebuilding what was nearly lost. The new year began with something I never expected, an invitation to speak at a national elder safety conference in Phoenix. Evelyn would be there too, leading a panel on financial ethics. They want you to close the event, she told me over the phone. Tell them what it felt like to win without losing yourself. Standing in front of that audience weeks later was surreal. Rows of faces, lawyers, advocates, seniors, and students, watched as I began to speak. My story started with a folder full of lies, I said, and ended with one question that saved me. I told them how Evelyn had looked me in the eye that day in the bank and asked if I understood what I was signing. How that one sentence pulled the mask off everything. The room was silent, hanging on every word. When I finished, they rose in applause. Some stood wiping tears. Evelyn joined me on stage, shaking my hand. You turned pain into policy, she whispered. That night, as I lay in my hotel room, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the past few years, how close I'd come to losing not just my money, but my sense of self. Now, my story was saving others from that same fall. Before turning off the lamp, I whispered into the quiet room, "It's over," but it mattered. And it did. Every scar, every question, every truth had built something lasting. A few weeks after the conference, Melissa invited me to her bakery. We're doing a small event for customers, she said nervously. You should see what I've built. When I arrived, the place smelled of cinnamon and fresh bread. The walls were painted soft yellow, and behind the counter hung a framed article titled From Mistake to Mission, One Woman's Second Chance. She greeted me with a smile, steady, sure. Dad, meet my partner, she said, introducing a kind-faced woman named Angela. We started this together. No lies, no shortcuts. I looked around the busy shop, customers chatting, laughter filling the space, and realized something. She had rebuilt herself honestly. That was her real redemption. At the end of the visit, she handed me a small white box. Inside was a cookie shaped like a rose. On the lid, written in icing, were the words, "Thank you for believing truth mattered more than family pride." I hugged her, the first real hug since before the betrayal. You've done well, Melissa, I said. Driving home, I placed the cookie box on the passenger seat beside the old award plaque. Two symbols of two victories, one over betrayal, and one over bitterness. Spring brought an unexpected letter from the governor's office again. They were establishing a permanent grant fund to educate seniors about fraud and guardianship abuse. They wanted to name it the Hart and Carter Foundation. I sat staring at the letter for a long time. Evelyn came over that afternoon, and when I showed it to her, she blinked back tears. We did it, she whispered. We really did. The foundation launch was held in Tucson, at the same civic center where I'd once sat trembling, telling my story to strangers. Now I stood on stage beside Evelyn as she read the dedication, for every voice that said no when it mattered most. The crowd cheered, and cameras flashed, but all I could think about was that day in the bank, the fear, the trembling pen, the question that started everything. After the ceremony, Evelyn and I took a walk outside. The desert air was cool and clean. What now? She asked. I smiled. Now we rest a little. Maybe take that California trip we always talked about. She laughed. You mean it this time? I do, I said. No more waiting for the next fire. We drove west that April, through dusty highways and long stretches of open sky. The Pacific came into view just as the sun was setting, a strip of gold against endless blue. Evelyn rolled down the window, the sea wind whipping through her silver hair. This was worth the wait, she said. We spent the next week visiting small coastal towns, drinking coffee in roadside diners, walking along quiet beaches. Every night, I wrote a few lines in my journal, simple thoughts about peace, trust, and love that didn't need to prove itself anymore. One evening, as we watched waves crash against rocks, Evelyn asked softly, "Do you ever regret it? How things turned out?" I thought for a long time. "No," I said. "Regret keeps you chained to the fire." I walked through it. I'm still standing. We sat in silence, the sea roaring around us. For the first time, the past didn't feel heavy. It felt like a story finished. When we drove back home days later, I felt younger somehow, lighter. The house greeted me like an old friend. My roses were blooming again. Months passed. Life slowed into quiet joy. Melissa's bakery thrived. Evelyn started writing her book, part memoir, part guide for others. She sent me the first draft to read. The title made me smile, the question that saved him. One morning, I brewed coffee and sat by the window, flipping through the pages. My name appeared often, not as a victim, but as a survivor. A man who faced the worst kind of betrayal and still found his peace. Later that day, Melissa and the kids came over. We cooked dinner together, laughter echoing through the house. It felt like life had gone full circle. After they left, I stood in the doorway watching their car disappear down the street. The house was quiet again, but it wasn't lonely. I turned to my desk, picked up my silver pen, and wrote one final note in my journal. She tried to make me sign over everything. Instead, I signed my life back to myself. Then I closed the book, placed it beside my wife's photograph, and smiled. Outside, the sun dipped low, painting gold across the sky. My roses swayed gently in the evening wind. I didn't need revenge anymore. I had truth. I had peace. And in the end, that was enough. Please subscribe, like and share for more.